Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. Oh, there we are. I'm good at karaoke. Good morning or good afternoon and welcome to our policy event, Investigating and Prosecuting the Destruction, Looting and Illicit Trade of Cultural Property Linked to Terrorism, hosted by the Permanent Missions of Norway and France, the Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate, CTED, us, UNESCO and the Soufan Centre. I'm Rachel Attlee, the Coordinator of Political Analysis and Research at CTED, and we have an excellent panel for you today. But before we get started, a few quick points. The Wi-Fi code is at the back of the room if you need that. The bathrooms are just on the other side of this wall if you need to visit those. This event will be recorded and it will be posted on the CTED's website and on the websites of some of our partners after the event for you to go and watch it. If you're joining us online, welcome, thank you. Please keep your cameras and microphones off until you're called on during the Q&A session. We have a journalist in attendance, Rachel Anderson, and she's going to be filming small parts of this event, including the panel presentations who have given their consent for that. But she's not going to be filming directly any of the, she won't be directly filming the audience or other participants, and she will not be filming the Q&A session. So if you raise your hand to speak, you won't be filmed. We have a very full program of expert panelists for you today. So we kindly ask all of the panelists and all of the attendees to keep their presentations and questions brief. Agath in the second row will be waving a pink flag for those when they've got 30 seconds to go, so that you see her waving, please begin to wrap up. And on that note, I guess it's time to begin. We will now move to our opening session. We welcome Ambassador Mariette Fjeld Brattestad, the permanent representative of Norway to the United Nations, to open today's event. Thank you, Ambassador.
Wow. Okay. I'm turning it on. I know these microphones sometimes take a little while before they start working. So when you start passing them around, do not turn them off. That's a tip from me. But dear colleagues, first of all, welcome to the Mission of Norway. But more importantly, perhaps, welcome to this important event jointly organized by CTED, UNESCO, the Soufan Centre and the Permanent Missions of France and Norway to the UN. While the connection between destruction, looting and illicit trade of cultural property and terrorism is well known, rarely are the perpetrators of these crimes brought to justice through national or international jurisdiction. Both the UN General Assembly and the Security Council have condemned the destruction of cultural heritage by terrorist groups, with the Security Council repeatedly recognizing the connection between illicit trafficking in cultural property and the financing of criminal activities, including terrorism. We therefore welcome and strongly support the initiative by CTED, UNESCO and the Soufan Centre to advance criminal justice for such crimes. UNESCO has a leading mandate for the protection of cultural heritage and combating illicit trafficking. CTED is tasked with raising awareness on the destruction of cultural heritage by terrorist groups and supporting states in addressing the issue. And the Soufan Centre is a prominent non-profit organisation dedicated to global security. There is a need for such partnerships across all relevant sectors, along with strengthened international cooperation. Better knowledge and understanding are imperative to investigate and also prosecute this type of crime. While the UN's Global Terrorism Strategy elaborates on many of the perspectives, values and issues crucial for preventing and countering terrorism in an effective way, and with full respect of international law and human rights, there are still persistent gaps in the investigation and prosecution of the destruction, looting and illicit trade of cultural property and linked to terrorism. I would therefore like to thank all the panelists for making this event possible by sharing their experiences and perspectives, and to CTED, UNESCO and the Soufan Centre for organising it, as well as to our co-host at the Permanent Mission of France. And of course, a big thank you to all of you wanting to come here for this lunch hour workshop. And really good luck with this event. And thank you for your attention. And if you haven't had anything to eat and drink, please feel free. But thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we now welcome Ambassador Nathalie Esteval-Broadhurst, Deputy Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations. Thank you, Ambassador.
So the mic is on, right? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleagues, dear Merete, dear Natalia. Colleagues, it's a great pleasure and an honor to introduce this event together with Merete on the protection of cultural heritage in the context of the fight against terrorism. And of course, I would like to thank CTED, to thank UNESCO, to thank the Soufan Center for their expertise on this very important subject in their respective fields of competence. Thank you. As we know, the destructions of heritage and the illicit trafficking of cultural goods continue to constitute a threat to international peace and security. Armed conflicts and terrorism that affect every continent often deliberately undermine the cultures of countries and peoples, and they aim to destroy their very cultural heritage, the common asset of humanity. This destruction of the culture and identity of a country or people is in some cases an integral part of the terrorist tactics. Destructions of cultural heritage fuels violence, hatred, and revenge between peoples. And it therefore weakens the very foundations of peace. It's no coincidence that UNESCO's first major cultural convention, less than 10 years after the end of the Second World War, focused on the protections of cultural heritage in conflict situations. So combating the destruction, the looting, and illicit trade in cultural property linked to terrorism or conflict has long been a priority for France. France, together with Italy, took the initiative of drafting the first resolution at Security Council solely dedicated to the issue of cultural heritage in situations of conflict. It became the resolution 2347. And this resolution also encourages member states to designate entities or individuals that are involved in the illicit trade in cultural goods for inclusion on the 1267 sanction list to combat Daesh and Al-Qaeda. The resolution 2462 adopted in 2019, adopted at France initiative, explicitly mentions illicit trade and trafficking in cultural goods as one of the means of financing terrorism. And the FATF has since examined this phenomenon in detail. Trafficking in looted cultural goods is often used to finance terrorist groups. Such trafficking contributes to the persistence and to the escalation of conflict, and it is therefore essential that we put an end to it. And I hope this event, of course, will give us a very concrete opportunity to discuss what we can do together to continue the fight against this scourge using all the instruments at our disposal. And I'd like to stress only two important points because I know the panelists are going to explore and dive into the detail. The first is the importance of the complementarity and cooperation between experts. On the subjects we are dealing with today, it's vital to draw on the specialist skills of the customs services in particular, because the customs services, they are on the front line in seizing illicitly traded items and initiating investigations and legal proceedings against those involved in this trafficking. So interdisciplinarity and cooperation are obviously essential if we are to be collectively effective. And the second point I would like to stress is the importance of mobilizing civil society, because civil society has a major role to play in the fight against terrorism. On this very aspect, their role is essential, whether in terms of raising public awareness, or liaising with local population to alert the authorities in the event of an attack on heritage sites. The academic community obviously plays a central role, as demonstrated by recent research projects such as ATAR, the Antiquities Trafficking and Heritage Anthropology Research. And feedback from the field in source countries is crucial in the fight against trafficking in cultural goods, and also in establishing a direct link with the perpetrators as a key factor. So I won't take much longer, but I'll end in expressing once again the hope that this event will help us to improve a very operational answer and question and answer and debate about how to better tackle this massive issue. Thank you so much and have a great panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We will now hear from Assistant Secretary General Natalia Gurman, Executive Director of CTED, for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, dear Rachel, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, colleagues, dear guests. It is also a great pleasure for me to welcome you all to today's event on behalf of CTED. And of course, we are very honored and very privileged to be able to partner for the organization of today's event with the permanent missions of Norway and France, UNESCO, and of course, our long-standing partner, the Soufan Center. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank the distinguished ambassadors who found time to be with us here in person, as well as Dr. Ali Soufan. So, colleagues, last year, CTED hosted an event during Counter-Terrorism Week about the links between the destruction and trafficking of cultural property and terrorism. And one of our conclusions was that more needed to be done to investigate and prosecute these crimes. The Security Council has condemned the unlawful destruction and illicit trafficking of cultural heritage in armed conflict, including by terrorist groups. And in certain contexts, it has been recognized to be part of a deliberate strategy to deny historical roots and cultural diversity. The Council has also highlighted that international cooperation plays an indispensable role in the criminal justice response to this phenomenon. Dear guests, to counter trafficking in cultural property for terrorist purposes and advance criminal justice responses, CTED is mandated, and I quote, to raise awareness of the importance of member state cooperation with investigations, prosecutions, seizure, and confiscation, as well as the return, restitution, and repatriation of trafficked, illicitly exported or imported, stolen, looted, illicitly excavated, or illicitly traded cultural property. I am quote from the text of the resolution. And we have systematically addressed these points with member states during our assessment visits, and we do collaborate with other UN partner entities, civil society, academia, and the private sector to promote these efforts. While the links between terrorism and the destruction of trafficking in cultural heritage artifacts are well known, efforts to investigate and prosecute them remain relatively rare. This is the conclusion that we reached based on the information received in our own assessment visits. So comprehensive legal and policy tools exist, but the lack of implementation and coordination continues to hamper progress. So today, CTED is very pleased, as I said, to co-organize this timely event with our partners and offer the podium to a very distinguished panel of experts. Many thanks for accepting our invitation to be here with us today. In order to raise awareness, to strengthen international cooperation, and advance accountability for the destruction, looting, and trafficking of cultural property for terrorist purposes. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. And we'll now hear a recorded video message from Ernesto Ottone, the Assistant Director General in UNESCO.
Excellencies, dear experts, partners, and colleagues, it's a great pleasure for UNESCO to co-sponsor this event dedicated to prosecuting the destruction. Excellencies, dear experts, partners, and colleagues, it is a great pleasure for UNESCO to co-sponsor this event dedicated to investigating and prosecuting the destruction, looting, and illicit trade of cultural property linked to terrorism. I would like to thank the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Committee Executive Directorate, the Permanent Mission for Norway and France, the United Nations, as well as the Soufan Center, and express UNESCO's appreciation about our solid cooperation in this field. We are gathered here today under the conviction that culture is not a secondary issue in crisis, but a fundamental humanitarian and security concern. In the declaration unanimously adopted at the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policy and Sustainable Development, Mondial 2022, member states commended the new impetus given to the role of culture for sustainable development, peace, and stability as a force for resilience, social inclusion, and cohesion. The declaration also renewed UNESCO's central action in the fighting against illicit trafficking of cultural property and set the path for a strengthened response of the organization to the challenges posed by this scourge. UNESCO has given this issue a top priority since it touches the very heart of our mandate, building the defenses of peace in the minds of men and women through culture. We have, for over a decade now, and with our partners' support, advocated for the inclusion of the fight against illicit trafficking and the destruction of cultural property into the global security agenda. Thanks to our joint efforts, the United Nations Security Council, through Resolution 2199, recognized illicit trafficking of cultural property as a source of financing of terrorism and extended the prohibition of trade of cultural objects already in place for Iraqi objects since 2003 to Syrian antiquities. The milestone was followed by the Resolution 2253, which highlighted the importance of developing strong relations with the private sector in countering the financing of terrorism, as well as the strengthening due diligence process. And finally, in 2017, by Resolution 2347, the first to focus exclusively on the protection of cultural heritage. Today, we are continuing our efforts and collaborating with the United Nations investigative team to promote accountability for crimes committed by Daesh ISIL in order to support domestic efforts to hold this terrorist group accountable for the crimes committed in regard to Iraq's cultural heritage. However, despite all our efforts, the situation remains very worrying in many countries today. Illicit trafficking of cultural property and its destructions continue to be exacerbated by the legal and administrative vacuum created by armed conflict and disasters, while the increasing role of online platforms facilitates anonymous trade on the black market. Ladies and gentlemen, we must join forces to investigating and prosecuting the destruction, looting, and illicit trafficking of cultural property linked to the terrorism. We need more research, data, and case studies to fight the impunity that unfortunately persists. I would like to conclude by thanking all of you present today for your support. As if we are to reverse these trends, we need to unite our efforts. I wish you fruitful discussion. Thank you for your attention.
thanks to UNESCO. And now we will hear welcoming remarks from Ali Soufan, Chair and CEO of the Soufan Group.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, Madam Ambassadors, Your Excellencies. I want to begin today by thanking our host, the Permanent Mission of Norway, and also thank you for the wonderful lunch that you prepared for us. I would also like to thank the Permanent Mission of France for their help and dedication to the cause, our friends and partners in CTED and UNESCO for all their contributions in bringing this event together. From the Bamiyan Buddhas in Afghanistan to the beaches of Tunisia, from Palmyra, Syria, and Mosul, Iraq, to the destroyed mausoleums of Timbuktu, examples abound to illustrate how terrorists recognize the power of cultural heritage. These groups utilize this intentional destruction to validate their narratives, to marginalize and stigmatize communities, to financially profit, and to rewrite history. It is ultimately a form of control. Despite the severity of this crime, including the fact that it is a war crime and often occurs in conjunction with genocides, efforts to investigate and prosecute the destruction, looting, and illicit trade of cultural heritage remains relatively rare, often with light penalties for the offenders. Our work at the Soufan Center has sought to eliminate the brutality of the intentional destruction of cultural heritage, investigate aspects of the illicit antiquities trade, and highlight the link between this crime and other human rights abuses and war crimes. Through research, we seek to engage member states, law enforcement, private sector, cultural institutions, multilateral entities, academia, and others to provide timely analysis and actionable policy recommendations. Our goal is to aid in furthering transnational justice on this issue. Today's event is an opportunity to not only hear from experts across the different fields about the scope of the issue, but also potential solutions in how to strengthen investigative processes and further accountability. We have many important sectors represented here today who play a vital role in the protection and maintenance of cultural heritage. By gathering together, I believe this event can serve as an important inflection point, or at least a beginning of an important inflection point, to work towards ending the relative impunity of these crimes. Thank you. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for being part of this event, and I look forward for the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ali. And that concludes our opening remarks. So thank you, ambassadors and distinguished guests. Before we hear from our incredible panel of expert speakers, we will have a keynote address from UNESCO's Director of Culture and Emergencies, Krista Pickett, in a recorded statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to address this important gathering, co-organized by the Permanent Missions of Norway and France to the United Nations, the Soufan Center, CTED, and UNESCO. Protecting and safeguarding the world's cultural and natural heritage is one of UNESCO's core mandates. Since its foundation, UNESCO has developed a set of legal instruments in the field of culture, including the 1970 Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. To date, 145 states are parties to this instrument, which affirms the importance of protecting cultural property against the dangers of theft, clandestine excavations, and illicit export, and recognizes the centrality of international cooperation in this regard. In alignment with these objectives, UNESCO supports its member states, including through preventive action and technical advice, to facilitate the return and restitution of cultural property. Our organization works closely with its partners to assist states in establishing inventories of movable cultural property, developing strong national legal frameworks, technical and administrative capacities, and launching educational campaigns. As part of its global advocacy efforts, UNESCO is developing the first virtual museum of stolen cultural objects to sensitize the public about the scale of illicit trafficking and facilitate the return of artifacts. Together with our partners, we support law enforcement and museum professionals, as well as representatives of the judiciary, through the organization of trainings which provide opportunities to learn about the various existing tools to fight against the scourge and strengthen regional networks of cooperation. UNESCO also encourages establishing and training specialized units, especially within the police, to facilitate the recovery of stolen and lost cultural property and the adoption of penal or administrative sanctions. Over the past decades, the links between the protection of cultural property and international security have been increasingly recognized, as testified also by the United Nations Security Council resolutions 2199 and 2347. These resolutions support UNESCO's conviction that culture and the protection of cultural heritage has an important role to play in promoting and maintaining peace and security. The Buddhas of Bamiyan, the Al-Nouri Mosque, the Mosul Museum, the mausoleums of Timbuktu, and the cities of Nimrud, Hatra, and Palmyra are just a few examples of the impact that terrorist groups can have on our cultural heritage. And although the link between terrorist groups and the destruction, looting, and illicit trade of cultural property does not always make the headlines of international news today, we know that these groups are still operating in far too many areas around the world, and our attention should not waver. In light of these attacks on culture, UNESCO has strengthened its efforts to promote culture as a tool of resilience, response, and recovery during emergencies. This is the essence of UNESCO's flagship initiative, Revive the Spirit of Mosul, that was launched by the Director General of UNESCO in Mosul in 2018, the city scarred by the destruction and looting of its rich cultural heritage by Daesh during the occupation. Thanks to the financial support of its partners, the United Arab Emirates and the European Union, UNESCO supports the reconstruction of emblematic cultural and religious landmarks that are strongly linked to the history of Mosul and the identity of its people. We also provide trainings as well as jobs and livelihood opportunities to the youth so as to support the affected community's recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, it is because of the meaning and importance that communities attach to cultural property that they cannot be treated as mere commodities. The illicit trafficking of cultural property also disrupts traditions and practices, the intangible cultural heritage related to them, and perpetuates a cycle of exploitation, commodification, and devaluation of cultural practices. This can lead to a loss of appreciation for the knowledge, skills, and traditions that are vital to maintain the vibrancy and diversity of our cultural expressions. International cooperation is critical to the success of our efforts to address this transnational crime. Therefore, we are committed to strengthening our collaboration with international partners, specialized law enforcement, the judiciary, NGOs, and the civil society. This includes promoting research, advocating for and building capacities to investigate and prosecute the destruction, looting, and illicit trafficking of cultural property linked to terrorism. Thank you so much for joining these important discussions today. I wish you fruitful deliberations and thank you for your attention.
So an enormous thank you to our 5 co-hosts for our open session. And we'll now turn to our panel of experts who some of have travelled domestically and internationally to join us here today. So an enormous thank you for being here and for joining us online. It's very much appreciated. Our first speaker is the Soufan Centre's Michaela Millender, and she's recently published an excellent report, Identities Destroyed, Histories Revised, the Targeting of Cultural Heritage and Soft Targets by Illicit Actors. It's available on the Soufan Centre's website. Do take a read, it's an excellent report. This adds to Michaela's impressive body of work on terrorism, global security, and migration. Welcome, Michaela, and please share your research with us.
If this works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the other co-organizers for having me here today and for bringing this event together. So I hope this presentation can also help lay a really good groundwork for the other wonderful esteemed speakers we have here today. Perfect. So I'm gonna go through a few of the motivations for why I use the term illicit actor in my paper, but we'll speak specifically about terrorists today. Illicit actors just encompasses both organized crime and terrorist groups, but some of the motivations. And so first, the financial motivations are quite extensive. It's a lucrative industry for terrorist groups to get involved in illicit antiquities trafficking. The numbers are a bit hard to quantify, but the U.S. Congressional Research Service estimates that the transnational trade in cultural heritage trafficking could range from several $100 million to billions of dollars annually. So it's quite lucrative. And certain characteristics inherent to the arts and antiquities industries can contribute to the illegal trade and allow these groups access to legitimate financial systems. And also this type of trafficking and trade is seen as a relatively low enterprise for these actors when compared with other types of smuggling, such as drug smuggling or smuggling in human beings. And so because of that, it also makes it a more attractive enterprise to get involved in. Then the last thing I'll speak on is the last two things will be the evidence of the crime-terror nexus is increasing. An example of this is when ISIS moved into Mosul. There was evidence that criminals involved in the antiquities trafficking industry may have helped advise some of these terrorist groups in how to get things to market, how to participate in trade, where to look for archaeological sites. And then, and lastly, there's an increasing role of online platforms, legitimate platforms. So, communication tools such as Telegram and WhatsApp are increasingly used to establish personal connections, and places like Facebook Marketplace, which always surprises me, that is a place where a lot of trafficking and trading happens. So these are ways in which these illicit actors or terrorists utilize legitimate platforms to get involved in the trade. So the next motivation I kind of qualify it as is narratives, propaganda, and subjugation. That's another motivation. So although it may seem contradictory to want to profit from the antiquities trade while also destroying things that a group might consider an idol or say that in their narratives, those things coexist. ISIS showed that to us. And so the destruction, the physical destruction of either sites or artifacts can be used to further these groups' agendas and narratives, spread their propaganda, and ultimately their goal is to rewrite history. They can use this to stigmatize and marginalize specific communities and often try to dismantle the norms of a society. And this destruction can not only obviously cause havoc on a society, but it can hinder post-conflict recovery and resiliency even when a conflict ends. It destroys sometimes these fragile social fabrics, and then it can be really difficult to rebuild afterwards. And a byproduct can also be it reduces tourism revenue, which also makes recovery more difficult. As the value of cultural heritage and these sites and artifacts can sometimes be inestimable, especially intangible forms of cultural heritage that could be destroyed, so things other than artifacts and buildings. Sometimes that can make it an easily dismissed issue, and sometimes the impact of this destruction can then be overlooked as a result. But the reality is this destruction never happens in a vacuum. These things are always occurring alongside other human rights abuses, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and often genocide can either precede a genocide or happen at the same time. And so even if we debate whether or not these acts are in itself a form of genocide, they're always happening in conjunction with one another. And that sort of emphasizes the severity, I believe, of these crimes, as well as the fact that has been prosecuted successfully as a war crime. So the next slide just shows, only a few, this isn't exhaustive examples of places where this type of destruction has happened. I do have some organized crime. So Florence, Italy is an example of an organized criminal group destroying cultural heritage. But the rest of these are just really to show the breadth of the issue. It's not limited to a particular continent or place, but it's happened in many places. And this is obviously not exhaustive, but just a few examples. So I'm going to briefly go through some of the international accountability mechanisms of prosecution elements. And of course, I have many esteemed colleagues that are going to get into the specifics of some of these things. But acts that just threaten to destroy cultural heritage have long been recognized in international law as crimes that must be held to account. We have the 1954 Hague Convention, which puts this into international law as well. But in its drafting history, it recognizes the tribunal at Nuremberg as bringing this into international law, which led to it being recognized in the ICTY and eventually with the ICC. And the ICC has a very helpful policy on cultural heritage, which helps explain some of the ways in which it can be prosecuted with various international crimes and how it may be applied if appropriate. And so we have the example in 2016 of the Almaty case where the war crime of destruction of cultural heritage, among a few other things, was successfully prosecuted, and about destruction of mausoleums in Timbuktu. And there's now a forthcoming delivery of judgment. We're waiting for this other case that also happened in Timbuktu. And so these are two important examples of this being prosecuted at the international level and help set a very important precedent. What these two examples also do show is how rare, unfortunately, the prosecution for this crime is at the international level. So I'm going to go really briefly because I've been given the flag, but just a few examples of this at the national level, which we have wonderful colleagues who can get into some of these specifics. But I do have one example I just want to really briefly highlight on buyer accountability that was done in the US against Hobby Lobby, which had to forfeit thousands of clay tablets and seals and pay $3 million, which shows that we can have accountability for traffickers, but also for buyers, which I think is important. But lastly, what I will say is, unfortunately, among those many wonderful examples of accountability, it's still unfortunately rare, the accountability. And so we have a lot of work to be done to prioritize these prosecution efforts, help law enforcement, who will also go into their presentations today, to be able to investigate and prosecute these crimes. And so it needs to be made more of a priority at both the national level and the international level to make sure we're not only investigating and prosecuting these crimes, but also enforcing penalties where appropriate, and not just focusing on restitution, but also focusing on accountability and prosecution. So I'll end there, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michaela. And we'll now hear from Senior Legal Officer Nicole El-Khoury from CTED's Middle East team. She brings a wealth of experience, including some time spent in Iraq with the UNITAD. She's going to share with you some insights from CTED's assessment work. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished experts. While links between terrorism and the destruction of or trafficking in cultural heritage artifacts are well known, efforts to investigate and prosecute the destruction, looting, and illicit trade of cultural property by terrorist groups is still lacking behind. The exact scale and scope of the issue remain difficult to assess. No one will forget the dramatic images of Daesh intentionally destroying sites, intimately associated with history, culture, religion of people. In certain contexts, these attacks have been recognized to be part of a deliberate strategy to deny historical roots and eradicate cultural diversity from the territories under Daesh control. And often they've been tied to the commission of other serious international crime, as Mr. Soufan mentioned. The UN Security Council has time and time condemned the unlawful destruction of cultural heritage and the unlawful destruction and illicit trafficking of cultural heritage in armed conflict, including by terrorist groups. Across its resolutions, the Council has underscored the way in which the looting and smuggling of cultural property can be exploited by terrorist groups to generate revenue, to support recruitment efforts, and to strengthen their organizational ability. The Council has also highlighted the international cooperation plays an indispensable role in the criminal justice response to the phenomenon. During the event mentioned earlier by CTED Executive Director, one of the conclusions then was that what was more needed is to investigate and prosecute such crimes. In Resolution 2617 of 2021, the Council further encouraged CTED to raise awareness of the importance of member states' cooperation with investigation, prosecution, seizure, confiscation, as well as the return, restitution, and repatriation of trafficked, illicitly exported or imported, stolen, looted, illicitly excavated, or illicitly traded cultural property. Still, we don't have an interpreter. CTED has been shedding light on the topic in recent years, fostering the work with relevant partners, such as increased engagement with civil society, academia, and the private sector to promote related efforts. CTED has also systematically addressed and mainstreamed this issue in its engagement with member states on behalf of the Counter-Terrorism Committee, including in-country assessments. During visits to member states, CTED inquired specifically about the identified nexus between organized crime and terrorism, but also when the issue concerned directly the destruction, looting, and illicit trade of cultural property linked to terrorism. Within the framework of such assessments and other engagement with partners, CTED has noted that there seems to be a persistent shortage of data and information on the scale and scope of the existing illicit trade of cultural property. CTED also noted that detecting, investigating, and prosecuting the illicit trafficking of cultural property, particularly when associated with terrorist groups, continues to be challenging for member states, regardless of their capacities. This is due to a number of factors, including the limited awareness and under-prioritization of the issue, insufficient understanding on the linkages between organized crime groups and terrorists in this area, insufficient efforts to enhance the capacity and expertise of national criminal justice practitioners in addressing the phenomenon, and the need for more coordinated international cooperation through both formal and informal channels. This is compounded by limited awareness and harmonization of existing relevant legal and policy instruments. So comprehensive legal and policy tools do exist, but the lack of implementation and coordination continues to hamper any progress. In response to these threats, member states have been called by the Counter-Terrorism Committee to enhance their law enforcement and judicial cooperation and introduce effective national measures at the operational and legislative levels. CTED has also consistently highlighted the need for proactive investigations into the linkages of terrorism, including parallel financial investigations, noting that many states lack relevant frameworks, capacity, or simply the will to do so. CTED is uniquely positioned to engage member states on behalf of the Counter-Terrorism Committee as they reflect upon promising practices as well as ample opportunity to further international cooperation in the investigation, prosecution, seizure, confiscation, as well as the return, restitution, and repatriation of illicitly traded cultural property. This is, for example, illustrated in the ongoing dialogue with Iraq on this issue. CTED visited Iraq on behalf of the committee in 2015 and in 2022. And authorities confirmed on both occasions that clear links between the financing of ISIL and several types of organized crimes have been identified in Iraq, including the illicit trade of stolen antiquities. Iraq is thus investing efforts to tackle the illegal trafficking of cultural property, including in cooperation with UNESCO, as we heard earlier, and other international organizations. In furtherance of its national strategy to preserve the historical heritage of Iraq, a specialized committee was formed to follow up on the progress of the national campaign to protect Iraqi antiquities, with implementation mechanisms at the international and national levels. The Red List of Iraqi Heritage in Danger, issued in cooperation with the International Council of Museums, is visibly displayed at Iraqi borders and crossing points, including the Baghdad airport, which we visited and assessed. From our recent reach out to the Iraqi judiciary, judges are warning of the increased pace of antiquity crimes and what they called random excavations, concentrated in several governments spread throughout Iraq, pointing out that these crimes continue indeed to finance organized crime groups. For example, during its control of the Nimwa Governorate, which capital is Mosul, Daesh worked to destroy archaeological sites that were difficult to carry or transport. As for small, transportable and sellable aircraft, they smuggled and traded them through neighboring countries, including global markets, or by promoting these aircraft on websites. Organized criminal groups smuggle these aircrafts from one country to another through their networks and within a structure in which the middleman is usually an expert. In this field, it relies on criminal network capable of transporting stolen goods and aircrafts extracted from illegal excavations within Iraqi territories or other countries. This confirms that terrorists and insurgent groups have long been seen to be capitalizing on regional smuggling routes and exploiting conflicts to facilitate their operations. Furthermore, the smuggling and trade of Iraqi antiquities seems to be increasing due to the lack of protection of archaeological sites, as archaeological finds have become widespread on websites, hence the mention earlier of random excavations. Investigation into smuggling routes indicate that antiquities smuggling operations that take place mostly through two lines, the first through the marches of the Maysan Governorate in Iraq, while the other prominent smuggling line is located across the vast desert to the border with Jordan, as well as the border with Turkey and Syria. The information confirms that smuggling antiquities is one of the most profitable methods, and based on the above, it is likely that the trade process will continue to a high degree in the medium term. Prosecution into these crimes is still very sporadic in Iraq and manifests itself through, for example, cooperation extended by the judiciary in Iraq to foreign jurisdictions who might request information or legal assistance. The Iraqi judiciary emphasized that CTED that combating antiquity smuggling requires, as we've heard this afternoon, local and international efforts. But it remains true that Daesh continues to smuggle items at the present time. And according to Iraq, the necessary cooperation with, for example, Turkey and Syria is still not up to the required level. The committee recognized the measure put in place in Iraq aimed at protecting cultural property from being smuggled and stolen, and had further recommended additional training and other forms of assistance for law enforcement and judiciary to increase the capacity of the authorities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We will now be joined online by Professor Ahmed Al-Fatlawi of the University of Kufa. He's an international criminal law expert, and he also is a member of an international humanitarian law committee in the Prime Minister's office. Professor, we're very pleased that you're able to join us online today. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Rachel. Regarding the situation in Iraq, the crimes committed by ISIS and their impact on the cultural heritage and Iraqi society from 2014 to 2015, ISIS controlled more than 4,500 archaeological sites. This included 2 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The current situation in Iraq seems to be the appropriate time to rethink the link between the destruction or loot of cultural heritage and tourism. The link between tourists and the destruction or looting of cultural heritage may be intended on a direct level to spread terror among civilians as well as to discriminate and then marginalize the targeted ethnicities directly. And the long-term destruction involves eliminating cultural heritage that cannot be looted, such as the destruction of the countless winged bull of the Assyrian deity Lamassu, 2,500 years old. The most dangerous of all is when a terrorist group such as ISIS intends to destroy or loot cultural heritage linked to religious belief, such as a holy book or tangible heritage that contains sacred symbolism. This is exactly what happened in Iraq when ISIS exploited religious and sectarian pluralism to target churches, mosques, and temples belonging to different religions. The Iraqi people still remember what happened in 2006 when Al-Qaeda bombed large parts of holy shrines for Shia Muslims in Samarra, which is a cultural heritage that carries religious symbolism that dates back hundreds of years. Had it not been for the intervention of the religious clerics at that time, and in particular the issuance of a fatwa by the most famous cleric, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, to prohibiting the destruction of cultural property for the sake of revenge. The situation have gotten out of control, and Iraq would have witnessed a civil war with severe consequences. Regarding the phenomenon of looting, stealing, or illicit trade in Iraq's cultural heritage and its relationship to ISIS, ISIS looted all the antiquities that could be carried. Then they were offered for sale to intermediaries who were usually fully informed of their value. Finally, the final place was auctioned using forget certificates without the auction houses exercising due diligence on obtaining ownership permission for an antiquity thousands of years old. The UN Security Council passed a resolution, we know, 2199 in 2015, which reviews existing UNESCO resolution 1483 to impose a prohibiting on the import of all cultural property originating from Iraq. However, despite this resolution, auction houses display looted antiquities widely. The phenomenon of the illicit trade in Iraqi antiquities goes back decades. In the 1990s, the former regime, through specialized brokers, sold countless antiquities to obtain a financial source due to the sanctions imposed by the Security Council resolutions. These facts challenge the legitimacy of antiquities. For example, what is offered at auctions? In other words, are they antiquities that were smuggled out of Iraq before or after ISIS took control of large parts of Iraq? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most prominent challenges facing the investigation and accountability for crimes of looting and illicit trade in Iraqi antiquities is that ISIS, in coordination with the archaeological experts, excavated archaeological sites that had not yet been discovered at that time. In addition to the fact that hundreds of archaeological sites and artifacts were not registered with the Iraqi authorities, houses should not be satisfied with relying on databases of stolen workers of art, such as Interpol, as materials that were excavated illegally and therefore are not documented, will not appear in the database of stolen workers of art, especially since Iraq has more than 10,000 historical sites. Our message today is that escaping investigation into this crime may mean granting immunity to terrorists to destroy or loot another cultural heritage in the future. Also, accepting the transit or sale of Iraqi antiquities looted by ISIS would mean participating in supporting a terrorist entity that financed its operations with bloody antiquities for killing children and women, such as Yazidi women and other women from the Shabak and the Shia Turkoman minorities. The open door policy of looting Iraqi cultural heritage and its link with the terrorism must be stopped, in exchange for not being immune from responsibility, whether state responsibility or individual criminal responsibility. The Iraqi government has now begun to execute several options to sever the link between looting Iraqis and financing globally through international practical cooperation. In particular, after Iraq accessed the Convention on Stolen or Illegally Exported Cultural Objects in 2023. And in this regard, we are looking to international cooperation between Iraq and specialized agencies such as the Counter-Terrorism Committee, UNESCO, and also we can benefit from the evidence that located by UNITAD to assist in the documentation, investigation, and accountability and recovery of Iraqi antiquities. Ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial to remember the importance of investigating and holding assets and individuals who cooperate with them in the transportation, display, and sale of antiquities accountable for their criminal acts. Doing so will ensure that future generations understand our commitment to preserving a heritage that belongs to all of humanity, not just for people of Iraq. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I hope you can hear the warm thanks from the room as well. We will now hear from Dr. Anya Neistat, the Legal Director of the Docket at the Clooney Foundation for Justice. Dr. Neistat has an extensive background in international human rights, including at Amnesty International, and today she'll share with you some insights from the Clooney Foundation's investigative work on looted antiquities. The floor is yours.
Hope you can hear me. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for letting me join this distinguished panel and for our hosts, of course. I will focus very specifically on the aspects of the subject that the Clooney Foundation and the Docket worked on. As you can imagine, we are not experts on cultural heritage. We're not archaeologists. We did obviously have experts working with us, but we looked at this issue from our lens, which is international crimes and accountability for international crimes. In fact, we started not so much with the issue of antiquities and cultural heritage, but looking into various ways in which crimes committed in the Middle East, primarily in Syria initially, were financed. And we saw that, obviously there were several ways, but antiquities trade seemed clearly one of them. So we expanded our work to include 4 countries: Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya, although primarily focusing on Syria and Iraq for a variety of reasons, including access and our ability to investigate. From the very beginning, we felt that we should start talking about this issue in a slightly different way. And I have to say, I think, and I'm very encouraged by what I've already heard on this panel, and in preparation to that, I do think that the discussion at least has shifted from just the question of protection of cultural heritage and the importance of cultural heritage and protection of cultural heritage in situations of armed conflict to the issues of investigations and prosecutions, because that was our pitch as soon as we understood, after some years of research, what we believe to be the core issue. That was our main pitch and our main recommendation. Essentially, we advocated for this matter to be discussed just in different terms, so that we stop talking about antiquities trade as a victimless crime, as something that only concerns a very small fraction of our society, basically rich people defrauding other rich people, who cares? And that we actually start looking into this as something that is used not only to destroy identities and culture, but also to finance war crimes, crimes against humanity, and terrorism. And ultimately, we stand on our conclusions that the only way to do that is through criminal prosecutions. To most of you, it would not be a revelation that literally I should say one more thing. We focused on the market end of it, right? Of course, we looked into everything, into the looting itself, various armed groups involved. We carried out field work in Syria, in Iraq, but also trafficking routes, working in Lebanon and Turkey, interviewing the diggers, the traffickers, everybody who provided valuable information. But ultimately, our legal focus was on the market end of it. The dealers who, not so much museums and auction houses, because I think that was covered by others, but literally the dealers through whom these items end up in museums and auction houses. And again, it will not be surprising to anybody in this audience that people on our list were very well known to law enforcement agencies. We did not discover, or almost did not discover, any new names. These people have been caught over the last 2 decades red-handed with looted items. What happened? At best, they were slapped on the wrist with fine or sometimes tax violations or some other very, basically, some administrative or very, very minimal criminal charges. And to me, it was particularly interesting to realize that as a result, their business went up. Because the only thing the market cares about is that the items are authentic. And a criminal prosecution and restitutions basically prove to the market that these people are dealing in authentic items and not fakes. That's just an anecdote, but I think it illustrates the core of this issue. To this day, even the cases, even the prosecutions that we were aware of that at that time, our big report came out 2 years ago, and when we started this research in 2020, we were told that some of the cases are imminently going to trials, like the case of Spain. No, it has not happened yet. And that is the case with pretty much all of the other prosecutions that we were either aware of or part of in terms of submitting evidence. So we submitted all of our evidence to several law enforcement agencies, prosecutions in European countries, in the United States. Of course, then the war in Ukraine happened and many of the same units switched their attention to what's happening there. Capacity is an issue. But ultimately, I still do not see sufficient movement towards prosecutions. I think Steinhardt's case was another interesting revelation, that somebody can just walk with a promise to not, well, of paying, yes, but a promise to not collect antiquities at his advanced age. That was a very significant promise. But 12, like in the indictment, 12 criminal networks discovered. And what happened? And I think we're still in that space. And I very much hope that these type of discussions, and I do think that CTED's work already has escalated the issue to a very, very important point. But the next step should be making sure that law enforcement agencies, and I'm very keen to hear from colleagues on the panel, but advocacy-wise, they need our support. I'm not putting this on the prosecutors themselves. Many of them are keen to do it, but without public support, without international support, when they have 100 cases, some of which are direct rape and murder and other war crimes, they make their choices. And without our support, without our joint advocacy, these choices will continue to be made not in favor of taking these cases to a logical end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neistat. You got right on 7 minutes. I don't know how you did that, but well done.
Former radio journalist.
We'll now hear from Leslie Bakshi from the Criminal Investigative Team of the FBI's New York office. She's been in the FBI since 1998 in various capacities, but today she's going to share with you what the FBI's New York Art Crime Team is working on. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. I also want to thank the Permanent Mission of Norway and France, as well as CTED, UNESCO, and the Soufan Center for putting this together and hosting this very important topic panel. So what I'd like to do today is provide a background on the FBI's efforts in the art crime world. Following the 2003 looting of thousands of priceless antiquities in the Baghdad Museum in Iraq, we in the FBI realized there was a need for a group of specially trained special agents to focus on the art crime and theft of cultural property. And therefore, in 2004, the FBI established its Rapid Deployment Art Crime Team. Initially, the team was comprised of 14 special agents, and then today we are up to 25 special agents who have the responsibility of addressing art and cultural property theft in specific geographical regions within the United States. Here in our New York office, we are fortunate to have the FBI's most senior art crime team member, and we have a dedicated squad on this front. Our office not only handles cases within our area of responsibility, but often supports other domestic and international organizations. Our art crime team is coordinated through our FBI's Art Theft Program, which is located at our headquarters in Washington, D.C. Now, as we all know, stolen art and antiquities investigations present a number of challenges. The investigations are complex, they're geographically challenging, as most international cases are in scope. They require a different skill set than our typical investigations. We are working with art specialists, researching a work's provenance, understanding how a store can conserve these objects is very challenging. That's why our art crime team agents receive specialized training. They work with galleries, museums, auction houses, and those that are experts in this field that have been working for 40 years. Our efforts support the UN Security Council Resolution 2617 to investigate stolen and illicit traded cultural property. While not an exhaustive list, the FBI art crime team addresses the theft and recoveries of art, fraud schemes, money laundering, looted and trafficked antiquities, fraudulent and forged art, and Native American and ethnographic art investigations. It's important to highlight that often that what we see in the looting and trafficking of these bad actors, they're also involved in drugs, smuggling of drugs, guns, and humans. So often we see these investigations have a myriad of criminality going on. Our liaison contacts with the art institutions, local and state law enforcement, Interpol, our foreign law enforcement party, like my colleague here from Cabernet, is vital in our case progression and intelligence development. We need each other. It is crucial to share the information and work together. Fostering these relationships promotes collaboration efforts. We can be partnered with new entities to strive to strengthen existing connections. It's frankly a force multiplier. We also continue to aim to improve our repatriation efforts to ensure recovered artifacts and antiquities are appropriately delivered to their rightful. Now, often I get the question is, why is the FBI investigating art crime? Well, just for a little legal, the FBI has primary jurisdiction for all federal criminal laws, except those in which cases have been given jurisdiction to another agency. For art-related investigations, the FBI has jurisdiction over several types of criminality. Thefts from interstate shipments or the interstate of international transportation of stolen property, meaning an object has crossed state lines or international boundaries. Secondly, the theft of a major artwork in the United States. So a piece of art stolen in a museum here in the United States, we have jurisdiction. And then the trafficking of Native American human remains, the cultural artifacts. We also, which I think maybe not generally known, we will also take on cases and assist when we receive requests from foreign partners. The art crime team also maintains a national stolen art file. This file is a computerized index of stolen art and cultural property as reported to the FBI by law enforcement agencies in the US and internationally. This index consists of images and physical descriptions of stolen and recovered objects, in addition to investigative case information. The goal of this file is to serve as a tool to assist investigations in art and cultural artifacts, theft cases, and to function as an analytical database, providing law enforcement officials with information concerning theft. Another ongoing initiative that the FBI has with funding with State Department is providing on-site training to foreign law enforcement and archaeologists. The training is designed to improve evidence collection, enhance documentation of items of cultural patrimony, and add resources for publicly available information on looted goods. In addition to research creation, the FBI believes the prosecution of subjects involved in stolen and trapped antiquities is extremely important. We must maintain strong prosecutorial partnerships throughout the duration of our investigations. This cross-collaboration maximizes our limited resources and provides opportunities to generate innovative ideas to augment our current processes. One example of providing training is recently in February of this year, our team traveled to Kyiv at the request of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine regarding art crime and cultural crimes, something that it has been designated a war crime in Ukraine, and is something that we are providing them guidance and expertise. Again, as I touched on briefly, working these investigations pose a lot of challenges. I think as an enterprise, there is a lack of reporting often, and unfortunately, if a crime is occurred covertly and it's not reported, it is very difficult for us to investigate. Some victims are either unaware a crime has taken place or believe the situation can be resolved without law enforcement. Understandably, there's perhaps a perceived embarrassment or shame that inhibit a victim's willingness to come forward and report the crime. Another challenge is technology. Technology also poses an obstacle as criminals become more adept using advanced technologies to obfuscate their illicit activity. However, we do have some success stories. Since its inception in 2004, we have recovered thousands of items of value in the billions of dollars. Some notable examples are Matisse, Odalisque in red pants. It was a $2 million painting stolen from a museum in Venezuela and replaced with a copy. It was recovered during a sting operation in Miami after a tip from a source identified the broker. Also, another notable one is the ruby slippers worn by Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz. It was stolen out of its museum in 2005. Someone went in the window and took them. At the time, it was valued at $1 million. It was finally recovered in 2018, and that value of the slippers were about 3.5. The subject was indicted on one count of theft of major artwork. And in terms of working with partners, apparently 4 slippers existed, and they were able to authenticate those slippers because the Smithsonian had in their possession another pair of slippers. The FBI was also successful in recovering stolen Turkish marble seals, which in New York, our office here in New York worked tirelessly to receive a request from the Turkey to recover these. Oh, sorry. All right. Well, I will stop on this example, but I do want to say I think it's important for us to work together, and I think to collaborate as we are today. And thank you. I'll give you a help.
Everyone, thank you so much, Special Agent Bakshi's. We'll now hear from Major General Francesco Gargaro, a commander in Italy's Carabinieri, who will share with you the work of the Carabinieri's Protection of Cultural Heritage Command. Over to you, Major General.
I will be very brief. I have a 1 hour speech and 200 slides, so stop the time. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a great honor for me to participate in this workshop, focused on the issues related to the fight against extraction and smuggling of cultural property in countries afflicted by terrorism. In this context, some contributions relating to the Italian experience in the specific sector will be shown. Today's central theme is a global challenge that requires a concerted international response, just as the sharing of information and expertise, the result of close collaboration between different nations, constitutes the key of effectively countering this phenomenon. In this perspective, the Carabinieri Command of Protection Cultural Heritage, TPC, since establishment in 1969, has also operated beyond the national border in fighting crimes against cultural heritage. Thanks to recovery of more than 3 million assets, the TPC is owner of the significant experience that is made available to the international community. Italy, considering the vastness and richness of its artistic and archaeological heritage, while sites, work, and monuments of inestimable value, has always been the target of aggression by traffickers and criminal organizations. Investigations carried out over the years revealed that the final destination of many stolen goods is mostly abroad, especially for the most valuable historical and artistical goods, through illegal trafficking with a national dimension that require our effective response, which goes beyond national borders. Organized crime is more and more interested in the sector due to its high profit and the low risks. The ease of crossing borders, the lack of specific laws in some countries, and the absence of adequate documentation from many Arab objects make it more difficult to specialized police forces to take action against them. This situation generates a fertile ground for criminal activities. Through the purchase and sale of artworks, value opportunities can be found to invest currently legitimate activities and launder money coming from other illicit trafficking, such as drugs and weapons. The illegal trade of cultural goods is a complicated and transnational phenomenon managed by a network of people with well-defined roles. At the base of the supply chain, we get those who materially deal with the theft of the clandestine excavation of artworks and archaeological finds. These individuals often work in synergy with brokers and the receivers, sometimes linked to organized crime. They manage traffic internationally, taking advantage on the less strict legislation of some countries to hide the goods in the safe warehouses, often within customs areas. The assets are then laundered by criminal organizations, giving them a lawful origin through the alternation of the works of first intermediation and sales involved in stores, auction houses, experts in the field, art galleries, even foreign museums. The point of arrival of this supply chain are the wealthy art dealers who operating outside the national borders make the most consistent profits. This phenomenon, which increasingly affects organized crime, is confirmed by numerous investigations conducted with the support of Interpol, Europol, and Eurojust in Sicily, Calabria, Puglia between 2014 and 2021. These activities produced associations dedicated to international trafficking of cultural goods between Italy, Belgium, France, Germany, United Kingdom, Serbia, Spain, and Switzerland, leading to the recovery of over 27,000 artifacts worth several million euros. Talking about the topic of today's conference, particular attention must be paid to what has been caused by the Middle Eastern conflict and the plundering of cultural heritage by terrorist organizations such as Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. This last, in addition to having destroyed cultural sites of inestimable value for ideological and propaganda purposes, have used cultural heritage as a form of financing, as evidenced by the well-done United Nations Security Council resolution of 2015. These criminal organizations has in fact exploited the pre-existing widespread activity of spoliation, and archaeological and cultural sites. Those areas have always been the goal of clandestine excavation carried out by local populations forced to pay terrorists in order to continue the illicit trafficking. In actual evidence of this illicit market of goods from the above-mentioned context is the investigation carried out since 2003 by Carabinieri TPC, which have made it possible to recover in Italy about 200 artifacts from the Middle East. In addition to this asset, there are 40 archaeological finds of alleged Iraqi and Syria region, located in 2017 by TPC investigator following monitoring of auction house and gallery website located in the United States, United Kingdom, and now in Canada, from which prosecutors have already begun for recovery and return to the countries of origin. To strongly combat this phenomenon, an effective commitment is needed, also by modifying national and international regulatory systems so that it's possible to strengthen cooperation between police, judiciary, and cultural institutions around the world, to promote the cataloging and documentation of cultural heritage at a preventive level, to create police units specialized in a specific sector, capable of operating abroad in crisis situations where cultural heritage is at risk, to exploit information technology to create and feed interconnected national and international databases, and use artificial intelligence to analyze data image from the people who spies them. To establish international e-commerce regulation with clear responsibilities for sellers, couriers, buyers, and platform auction houses owners. It is a path taken by Italy also through the commitment and experience of TPC, which signed 2016 in order to respond to the destruction of cultural work in Syria and Iraq by terrorists, has created and made available to the international community the blue helmet of culture. It's a task force made up of experts from the Ministry of Culture and Carabinieri TPC, qualified to intervene in Italy and abroad, also under the aegis of UNESCO, on the occasion of natural disaster, in situations of armed conflict, and in areas affected by devastation and looting by terrorist groups. This team is in fact able to operate for the protection of cultural heritage and is safety in protected places, hearing the expertise of NATO's K4 and Ancient Babylon missions carried out by TPC in Kosovo and Iraq between 2002 and 2006, with the recovery of numerous assets stolen from the Archaeological Museum of Baghdad, often required in the context of international military mission to train the police of other states, providing the necessary tool to combat illicit trafficking in cultural goods. In Iraq, from 2018 to 2019, 38 courses were held for units of Iraqi Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Culture and Activities, training over 1,000 units. This capability has been shared with other countries involved in the fight against international illegal trafficking, through seminaries and training courses, in particular with workshop of courses throughout the Middle East and North Africa. The paramount importance for cultural protection activities in the knowledge of all the worlds to be searched, and in this context, the TPC represents a world excellence with a database of releasing stolen cultural heritage, which constitutes the largest database in the world of stolen art assets, with 1,300,000 words to be still searched. This database, integrated with the Leonardo computer system of TPC Command, developed for the management and the storage of preventive law enforcement activities, containing information on more than 7 million assets. Okay, stop with that. The constant evolution of information technology and the growing use of interest for the tracking the artworks, also by criminal organizations, have led to the development of advanced law enforcement system with the realization of a program SWOT, Stolen World of Art Protection System. It's a web, deep web, and social media search software powered by the artificial intelligence, which in 2023 received in Dubai the International Award of the Best Innovative Computer System of the police forces around the world. This tool is able to analyze the data collected 20 hours a day, comparing them with the information already entered in the illicit stolen cultural heritage database. These important basic tools can be made available to other specialized police forces to counter the theft and the commercialization of looted dispersed cultural heritage in various contexts of crisis and armed conflict. In fact, experts from the Carabinieri TPC, as part of UN mission funded by the European Union, are sharing skills to allow the Iraqi authorities to set up and manage their own database aimed at cataloging and recovering the work stolen during the occupation of the area. I'm concluding. Not too late. In this context, I'm finishing, really. In this context, in Italy, during 2022, following the entry into force of Council of Europe Convention on Crime Against Crime Property, was approved a law that introduced specific criminal offenses against cultural heritage, also providing for an aggravation of penalty with particular regard to the most serious crime of devastation, looting, and least important cultural property. For example, we have undercover activities with the possibility for PPC to infiltrate criminal organizations to collect elements of guilt. Mandatory seizure also for equivalent with allow the seizure of goods in any case of same value as stolen cultural ones. And extended confiscation with the possibility to extend the confiscation not only to the assets that are the subject of crime, but also to those that constitute profit. I conclude, really, by thanking this assembly once again and offer the full availability to the capability PPC to carry out the training and capacity building activities in favor of the police forces of the states interested in catching units specialized in fighting against crime, to stimulate the strengthening of the legislation about the protection of cultural heritage on the basis of the Italian model, to create database on the assets to be searched and eventually connect to the SWOT system, to establish specific task force on the model of Italian blue helmet culture, in charge of protection cultural heritage from the natural disaster and in context characterized by war conflicts and terrorist crime. I finish saying that every single nation has the strength and the power, but only if we are united, we can do and give more. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Major General. I know better than to pick a fight with a police officer. Our final panelist, Corinne Muller, is joining us from Penn Cultural Heritage Centre, which, in cooperation with the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative, supports museums in conflict zones. Thank you, Corinne. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to all of our hosts for this opportunity for me to speak with you today. I am Corinne Muller, and I'm the program manager at the Penn Cultural Heritage Center at the University of Pennsylvania's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. And since 2008, our center has been working closely with domestic and international partners on these issues of illicit trafficking and the damage and destruction of cultural heritage. The Penn CHC and our partners at the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative recognize that the damage and destruction of cultural heritage has the potential as the principal evidence for war crimes and, in certain circumstances, for crimes against humanity and genocide. The international heritage community can assist primary stakeholders, such as national law enforcement, with a recording of such damage that could be then used judicially. In February of 2019, the Smithsonian and implementing partners implemented an on-site forensic documentation of the damage to the Mosul Cultural Museum in Iraq that set forth a model for field-wide methodology for documenting evidence about conflict-affected heritage that could be then used across conflict settings for the purpose of future judicial action. Our approach follows trends in forensic architecture and forensic archaeology, and the methodology was developed in consultation with the FBI Art Crime Team, as well as in collaboration with the Iraq State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. And we are extremely grateful for the support of the Iraq government in that effort. The methodology directly pulls from the FBI's 12-step crime scene evidence collection process that is taught globally. Ours is a 9-step approach that includes preparing for the investigation, securing the scene, conducting a site survey, photographing the scene, sketching the scene, marking, collecting, recording, and preserving evidence, conducting a departure survey, post-processing this data, and then writing a final report. Evidence types include the built environment, damaged objects, media representations, and physical debris and residue. Notably, while our documentation at the Mosul Museum found evidence of destruction, the forensic heritage methodology most significantly revealed a degree of theft that had been thoroughly covered up. The Penn CHC and the Smithsonian are also collaborating to publish rapid reports that incorporate evidence using this forensic heritage approach with other lines of evidence for those same sites, such as the analysis of commercially available satellite imagery, as well as armed conflict and territorial control data and human mobility data. This kind of satellite analysis can be used in cases related to terrorism, For example, we are pleased to have used such methodology to work with ongoing investigations related to ISIS targeting cultural heritage sites in northern Iraq. However, this methodology also has replicability across conflicts, including those not related to terrorism, and it has broad applicability for accountability measures for perpetrators and the recovery of cultural objects unlawfully removed from a variety of conflicts, including what we are seeing in Ukraine. The Penn CHC also focuses on cultural property trafficking issues. In 2020, we launched a collaborative program under an MOU with the State Department's Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee called the Cultural Property Experts on Call Program, or CPOC. Through this program, we assist U.S. law enforcement, such as the FBI, with the identification of potentially illicitly trafficked antiquities by connecting agents with relevant subject matter experts who can consult on an object's identifiable country of origin, time period, and authenticity. This information is critical because it can help provide agents with grounds for seizure for objects suspected to be from countries with bilateral cultural property agreements with the United States under the Cultural Property Implementation Act. Notably, Iraq is among the most commonly identified countries of origin through this program, and we are collecting a unique database with this information. We're very happy to support and provide support and subject matter expertise to U.S. law enforcement through this program. Critically, I should note that in the data that we're collecting through this program, we can only see outcomes of trafficking when there is an interdiction at a border. We cannot comment on the underlying cause of the theft with regard to where that theft occurred because that is a law enforcement issue. However, we know about the Abu Sayyaf raid in eastern Syria in 2015, where an ISIS financier was caught with antiquities looted from Iraq that included catalog numbers from the Mosul Museum. And this analysis was managed by the Penn CHC. And through our satellite monitoring with the Smithsonian, we've documented looting, similar looting in cases not linked to terrorism. I would like to end on a note of cultural workers' safety, because this is a point that always deserves more emphasis within the heritage field. The Penn CHC has always been concerned about the safety of our colleagues during conflict and times of repression, as well as threats to artistic freedom and freedom of expression. But our work on the issue came to the fore in the direct aftermath of the Taliban seizure of Kabul, Afghanistan in 2021. And when Kabul fell, the former director of that museum began feeding us names of cultural workers at risk. Many of these people did not have evacuation and resettlement plans, and that means that for many of them, they did not have passports or other important documents collected and easily accessible. We've worked closely with the Artistic Freedom Initiative to steward through many of these cases, but we are still concerned about the people left behind. And we've been intentional about laying out guidelines for preparations around personal safety for our in-country partners in these other places that we work. We're also very intentional about helping our partners obtain visas and connecting them with our international networks so that, God forbid, they are ever forced to resettle, they have a support system of professional and personal contacts. It's about giving them international media attention, listing them as co-authors on international publications, and getting them into international professional fora, such as conferences, so that they have evidence of professional participation and value in the field. It's certainly something that we very strongly recommend that all international heritage organizations and related institutions actively support as they conduct their work related to terrorism and conflict. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. We will have a brief period for some Q&A. We don't have a lot of time, but Norway is graciously allowing us to stay over just a little. But we would love to take some questions from the room. And those of you who are joining us online, please post a question online and we will definitely make sure they get to our panelists. And we'll make sure that we can, if they have the opportunity, to respond to you online or by email. But we might just try and take 3 quick questions from the floor, and please be conscious of time in doing so. Julia, please raise your hands and I'll send her over to you. Please introduce yourself and what organisation you're from, and then ask your question.
Thank Thank you for this first session. I'm Ken from Japanese mission, permanent mission to the United Nations. My question is related to the Soufan Center's first presentation. You mentioned the eBay or Facebook Marketplace on e-commerce sites these days. Actually, the reality of those sites is super uncontrollable. And so sometimes the people who love the art collecting is actually willingly purchasing some stolen goods and unaware that it's stolen, and then unknowingly cooperating financially with terrorists. So is there any possible policy that the international community can take against these private e-commerce platforms, specifically asking to the CTED? Thank you.
I saw two other hands raised over here. We might just take a few more questions before putting yes, this gentleman here.
Hi, and thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Amr Al-Azam. I'm here on behalf of Athar Project, which you know her work. I have a quick question and a very quick comment. The question is, I know we talk about prosecutions and the problems of bringing forth these prosecutions. My question is really, why can't we prosecute the demand side? And I think that's where these prosecutions are focused on. Under the Terrorism Act, we prosecute, you donate $200 to, by accident, to some mosque and it turns out they're donating it or giving it to somebody else, and you go to 20 years at Rikers. And yet you have someone like Steinhardt who gets away with, well, you know what. So perhaps we can kind of think about it. The other comment has to do with Daesh. I think there's a tendency amongst a lot of people to lump Daesh's actions against cultural property as under one umbrella, and I think it's much more kind of nuanced. You need to separate between destruction of something like the Temple of Bel, which is a specifically designated act for the ability of Daesh to demonstrate its ability to act with impunity versus the impotence of local communities and the international community to react. Whereas there are attacks against religious sites, like Sufi shrines, like places of worship. These are more to do with the cleansing of Islam, if you want, extirpating of heresy. These are much more ideologically focused. And so people tend to not separate the two, and we should kind of think more along these lines. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Paul. I'm also from Athar Project, and Amr slightly took one of my questions, but with regard to prosecutions, rather than the demand side in terms of individuals, given the outcome of the Chiquita banana case yesterday, where the company was found guilty for financing terrorists in Colombia, can we look at major auction houses that knowingly engage in activity of trafficked items, similarly corporations that may be engaging in this activity, and use those other cases as models to prosecute under similar efforts? And in lieu of, a DOJ prosecution, is there opportunity to put pressure from the civil side with civil prosecutions, or for civil cases for individuals who have been harmed by the financing of those crimes?
Thank you for your question. And if we have one more question from the room, we would welcome that. Yeah, and then we'll put it to our panelists.
Hi, Tess Davis from the Antiquities Coalition, and just building on the comments by our colleagues today, if the panel could also speak about bringing in other transnational crimes that so often go hand in hand with antiquities looting and trafficking, like money laundering and sanctions evasion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we might now put those questions to our panel. And I just want to highlight also, we got an online question from the Global Internet Forum to Counter-Terrorism, also along with the lines of the question from our Japanese counterpart about the use of online spaces. Can I have a hand from anyone on our panel who would like to answer any of those 4 questions? Sorry. Or do we have another hand that I missed? Yes. Sorry, please go ahead, Nicole.
Thank you very much. You asked specifically for CTED if they have any suggestions. You mentioned illegal websites. Well, as you've heard from our experts, some of this stuff is on Facebook. So definitely the solution is in the realm of another cross-cutting issue that concerns information communication technology, where CTED is also involved and advocating with member states and international partners to protect the use of social media against abuse for various purposes. So this is very much a cross-cutting issue that doesn't concern anymore protection of cultural heritage. And we do advocate with member states to have in place legislation and infrastructure to protect their social media, their the access of different parts of society to the internet and what can they access. But if these items are on Facebook, they're also in the dark web, which is also another complication, and it makes things difficult for law enforcement to access and other. But whatever CTED is doing in this regard is raising awareness of member states during assessment visits and in other fora of the importance of monitoring the internet, obviously within the framework of protection of the freedom of access to these websites and how to exercise such freedoms. But this is two cross-cutting issues, and when it comes to posting on websites, it would be another topic that's that one is.
And Michaela? Yeah. I'll be brief, but just to comment on the aspect of something like Facebook Marketplace, I think this does get to content moderation difficulties and challenges in general, although I think increasing the awareness of the fact this is happening on Facebook is one way to put pressure on companies to do something about it, the lax moderation that allows this to happen. And I will say, I do think there could be a possibility of people unwittingly participating in the trade, although I'll quote a colleague of mine that that's essentially doubtful as well. Some of these groups are closed groups that you have to get into to be able to participate in. So I think the majority of people who are on there are doing it willingly, but there could be a possibility, particularly with the trading of coins and some things that are quite popular on those sites, to participate unknowingly. So I think increasing awareness is incredibly important. And then I think there was another question on accountability, and I would completely agree. It's why I highlighted the one case of Hobby Lobby, that more could be done in terms of buyer accountability. And using the various tools at our disposal. Something at TSC that we like to do is how do we use the tools we already have to address problems and challenges? And I think that using tools at our disposal, such as financing laws or sanctions, could be helpful.
I'll just add a few words on the prosecutions as the big proponent of this approach, but putting just a cautionary remark there that it's not easy. It's not easy because the threshold of proof, especially for war crimes and crimes against humanity cases, is high, and to prove that a particular item sold by a particular auction house or a dealer was linked to, done illicitly, and that money was transferred from this particular dealer to this particular group, not 500 intermediaries in between, but to this particular group, is just hard. Of course, with financing, we looked a lot into this. One of the problems, it's not an impossible problem. It's something that law enforcement agencies and we deal with all the time. But before the money even hits proper financial systems, it all goes through Hawala. But again, Hawala networks are being investigated, and some of them are linked to this trade. So it's not impossible, but it's hard. It's really these cases are never easy. However, and the one thing I would emphasize, I think that even opening investigations, because I think there is sufficient probable cause almost in any jurisdiction to start investigating those crimes, not just for forging of provenance or tax evasion, but for connections to terrorism or connections to war crimes. And even that, I'm convinced, will be an absolutely shattering effect on the market. If ultimately they are proven innocent, fine. But frankly, I think opening these investigations and dedicating resources, the kind of resources that civil society actors do not have capacity to dedicate to these cases, would lead to very interesting results.
Yes, please. Just two comments. One on the internet. Completely agree, but there are obstacles. The internet is massive. There are people, trading in child exploitable material. There are people trading in drugs. So it comes down to someone reporting it. And if we don't have a report, if we don't have the information, it is very difficult for us to go to these, be it Facebook Marketplace or any of these other web, content providers to shut down that particular website or that particular post of that information. So absolutely, it's something that we strive to do when we get the information, but it's again, coming forward, providing us the information to actually take those actions. And then regarding, prosecuting the buyer, yes, I agree. I think that's a great place. But again, as colleague from the Clinton Foundation mentioned, it's difficult. You have to prove the willful intent to knowledge, and that's always the difficult part of it. And again, that comes down to, is there someone on the inside that wants to come forward to provide records, conversations? It's what makes the investigation, pulling it together. So these are all things that we definitely, I used to work international corruption. Again, it's very difficult to prove a bribe between two people. It takes people wanting to come forward and cooperating. So that is, again, one thing we always, advocate is please come forward if you know something. The more information we have, the much easier it is to prosecute these individuals.
For those of you who also have additional questions, please post them to us, our organisers, post them online. We will definitely put them to our panellists and ensure we try and get a response to you. It's unfortunately now time to close out our session today. And for some concluding remarks, I'll call on David Sharia, Director and Chief of Branch at CTED.
Almost impossible.
Yes.
You hear now?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be almost impossible to try to summarize this discussion, and trying to do so without getting in trouble with Rachel would be impossible, and trust me, that's the last thing I want. So I'll try to wrap up with a few concluding observations. When Resolution 2617 was landed, I must admit that we at CTED have little knowledge at all about the links between cultural heritage and terrorism. And we were not even close to understanding the scope of the problem, and certainly not knowing what can be done about it. But I must admit, and I would like to first give ourselves a credit, that we were a good student, and with many thanks to our partners, beginning with the co-sponsors of this event, and the many partners here around the room, the Soufan group, and others who are not on this panel but still work with us very closely, such as two wonderful universities in Italy, the University of Verona and the University of Turin, and the International Association of Prosecutors, and many others. We are able to understand the problem. And I think the panel today has helped us also in crystallizing it, that the key issue, the key challenge is the investigation and prosecution of those offenses. But that's a title. And underneath this title, there are many, many pieces that we also only started touching the surface today, from the collection of evidence in the zones themselves, that sometimes can be derived from battlefield evidence, sometimes can be digital evidence, sometimes can be forensic evidence. How do you collect them in order to bring the cases to justice? All the way to the other side, to the end users. How do you make sure that they are held accountable and not, as was mentioned earlier, see this crime as a cost of doing business? You do it, you pay, and your reputation even raises because you get credibility in the market. How do you deal with social media companies or marketplaces that offer these tools? But experience has shown that things can be done on all fronts. Battlefield evidence, on digital evidence, forensic evidence. Things can also happen on the side of the end users, and clearly they are not today. And I could give two examples. For many years, dealers in diamonds said they cannot know where the diamond is coming from. It can come from anywhere. But then came the Kimberley process and forced all of them to make sure that the diamonds they're selling are not blood diamonds. And for many years, social media companies said, the internet is neutral. Whatever is happening on our platform, we have no responsibility. But pressure for governments, for civil society, for many stakeholders showed that they should be held accountable, not necessarily, by the way, in criminal proceedings, but held in the public court. And they changed the course and established CTED was an important player in this regard, the GIFCT, who I'm happy are here today to understand that yes, private companies together with public companies can accomplish a lot. It will be completely unrealistic for me to try to capture all that we have seen and learned today. For me, it was a wonderful learning experience. I hope it was for you. We have a lot of homework to do, and I promise you that we will do them and hopefully be able to come back to the committee, to the CTC, and to all of you with more ideas. Hopefully, we'll continue to benefit from the wonderful partnership that we have with all the panel members and with the other stakeholders, and be able to do something to deal with this crime. It's not an environmental crime. It's not a custom crime. It's a crime that finances terrorism, meaning people may be dying because of that, and it's a crime. And I agree with the observation here that you have to distinguish between the looting and the destruction. There are two separate things. The destruction destroys communities. So it's a very serious crime, and hopefully with the collective support of all of you, we'll be able to do something good about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Our collective thanks to Norway for their very warm hospitality. And CTED would like to thank our other co-hosts, France, Soufan Center, and UNESCO. An enormous thanks to our panelists who've traveled from near and far and online for joining us today. And finally, a special mention must go to CTED's Agat Sarfati, without whom this event would have not been possible. That concludes our event. Thank you.